do it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Kayfabe Critique. I'm David.
I'm Jason. What's going on, y'all?
So, Jason, what's going on this week?
Well, I'm representing Mike T. Sharp Barbershop. I don't actually cut hair. I do cut my own, but in honor of one of the greatest comedies of all time coming to America.
Yeah, man.
I sure ain't lying. And also keeping an eye on my fantasy football team because Cooper Kupp is lighting up. If you ain't drafted him, you might need to pick him up and see if you can grab him.
You know, I'm not playing fantasy this week, but I am enjoying football so far. Notre Dame's undefeated, the Chiefs are undefeated, so I'm having a good year so far.
Yeah, I can't say the same. My Cornhuskers got shellacked, and Dallas is in need of a certain receiver that used to do this, but he's in the suites with Jerry Jones and Beyonce concerts, so he's not really helping the squad too much. But that's another episode.
And so, in the world of wrestling, we saw Hulk Hogan back in the intro.
Where he belongs.
So back in WWE Graces, they put him in the new intro, which I liked. I liked the new intro this week.
I dug it.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I thought it gave a new spin on the then, now, forever.
It did, and how can you? I mean, I know what Hogan said and stuff like that on the Gawker and stuff like that, but if you're WWE, how can you ignore such a huge part of your history? I mean, to me, it's like none of what we cover, we probably wouldn't be interested in if it wasn't in large part for Hulk Hogan.
That's a good point. He was definitely part of that initial period that made wrestling what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That brought wrestling to the attention of millions. And
yes.
so, but another aspect of Hogan that brought the attention of millions is also back in the media with the NWO.
Man, I went to Orlando. I should have saved my trip to Orlando for this because I went to WrestleMania when it was in Orlando, and I wish I'd saved that trip now so I could go to this NWO reunion because when I was down there, I drove past Hogan's shop. I couldn't stop because I was on my way to the airport, but this NWO thing seems like it's going to be lit. I mean, with 83 weeks being shot right before that, it just seems like it's going to be the place to be.
Yeah, I'd love to find out what topic 83 Weeks is going to be doing before it. Is going to be something that ties into the NWO. We know they've covered the formation of the NWO, the creation, but they really stop at that point with their creation. It'd be really interesting to see, are they going to go a little bit further with the story of the NWO, or maybe deeper into one of the characters there, or are they going to go a completely different topic?
Yeah, who's to say? I mean, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to listen to that episode because I know Conrad and Eric are going to go in, and I know listening to Conrad, he is like in heaven getting a chance to do this episode, and like I would be too. I mean, there's just so much to cover with just the NWO. I mean, they covered July 7th, 1996, which is like one of those where were you moments in life, so who knows where they'll go.
Yeah, so with this situation, Conrad's the fourth man.
Or is it Bischoff?
Ooh, yeah, there we go. Is it going to be the big reveal? So, but, you know, as we're talking, people wouldn't be watching, possibly wouldn't be watching if it wasn't for that era, Hulk Hogan.
Right.
Which is a great segue to what we're actually covering today. We're covering the different eras of the WWE.
That's right. I mean, we put out some things on Facebook to try to figure out what eras people liked, and the two responses I got responses about the Attitude Era, and I got responses about actually the Ruthless Aggression Era. So yeah, let's dig into it. I mean, we're gonna get some shout outs as we get into this thing too, so let's go.
Yeah, so when we really think of the different eras in WWE, you know, you're going all the way back to the territory days and then moving all the way up into the modern era. And initially, so where I want to start the story is, let's start in 1979. And at that point, you're looking at 23 different territories spread across North America.
Mm-hmm.
all regional promotions.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing what we know as wrestling today.
Right.
Until Vincent Kennedy McMahon steps in.
And what he did was risky, it was revolutionary, and I mean, and if his dad knew what he was going to do once he actually sold the territory to him, he might not have done it. I've heard him say that on several occasions.
Right, because it was so different than what had been done. Prior to him, like we said, it was regional coverage. There was a belief you could sell advertising. It was definitely a niche product. There wasn't the belief that you can reach out to a mass audience.
Right.
And so in 1980, Vince files, he founded Titan Sports Inc. and files for the initials WWF for the name the World Wrestling Federation, taking off one of the W's from his dad's company.
Right. Right. And again, this is, like you said, 1980.
Yeah, that was 1980.
I mean, I can remember, well, shoot, I would have been 2 years old back then, but just thinking back to 1980, cable television hadn't really taken off yet. So really, the territories were they were getting their airtime through just like the local channels. A lot of their TV was shot in a small local TV studio once a week. So, I mean, what Vince's vision was at this time was like far beyond anything that anybody was thinking about.
Right, and so he furthers that vision. In 1983, he purchases Capital Sports, which was the parent company of WWF, from his father. And that's when he starts looking for syndicated television. Because he has that belief that if you can take the characters, develop them, and develop those storylines shown across a national audience, that will build your traveling and your house shows, and it'll get so much momentum, so much following, that you'll be able to reach out and get sponsors and get advertisement that'll bring back your money tenfold.
Right. So, again, still risky in 1983, but, very business savvy move once again, because WWF, their home base has always been New York, but if you think about what's the second largest media market, you want to get to LA, you want to get to Chicago, you want to get into Dallas, you want to get into the major metropolitan areas with your product so you can run shows there.
Yeah, and so when he knew with the syndicated television, you would also be able to have tape sales coming after it. And so to do that, he needed a product that people were going to want to watch, that it was going to grab the attention of everyone. So he goes around and he starts grabbing the top talents from each region.
Right, and this is one of those things that got him a lot of heat with a lot of promoters, because one of the guys he grabbed from this little promotion called the AWA, he did a little something with him, but he's grabbing people from like Mid-South and like Junkyard Dog. You got him from the Mid-South, also Jake the Snake Roberts, eventually Ted DiBiase. I'm trying to think of some other guys. He had Andre. He had a relationship with Andre the Giant at that time, but he's going. Roddy Piper is another guy he grabbed from one of the other territories. So this is a move that was not popular.
Right, and in his defense, he did go in and he tried to talk to the other promoters to come on board with him. And they didn't want to do it. They thought it was crazy. They thought they would put him out of business. And instead, they ended up facing an all-star team. And he took their stars, their talent, and he repackaged them in a way that the other people hadn't thought of.
Right.
And, that's where kind of the creative genius of them started to show. And not only the big vision of the company itself and the production value of what people would want to watch, but how to package these stars, how to package the talent that nobody else had ever thought of. And that leads us from the transition into the golden era.
Yes. And for those of you that's just listening, we've got just all kinds of images from the golden era. One thing you see on pretty much every one of these, with a few exceptions, you see Hulk Hogan all over this thing. I mean, we even got a picture of the old pile driver from the set of the old pile driver video, which, gosh, I can't believe that actually happened. But this is like looking back to when you first it's like going back to childhood basically.
Yeah, and I had a lot of fun putting these together. And when we talked about him repackaging talent, you just mentioned Hogan. So he took Hogan from AWA, which Hogan was in the AWA, kind of just a straightforward heel. There wasn't much to the character. There was a little bit of flash, but nothing like what Vince McMahon would put together. He would create the superhero, the say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and made him larger than life.
Right, and a lot of that was aided because actually right before he came to the WWF, he had turned, Hulkamania, he was selling Hulkamania shirts in AWA, but he did this movie in 1982 that a little movie called Rocky 3, shout out to the Creed 2 trailer if you haven't seen that, it's bananas. But he did this little movie called Rocky 3, and Vince's dad fired him because he went and did that movie, but Vince's dad had him booked somewhere, but Hogan goes and does this movie, and he ends up back in the AWA, and then Vince McMahon Jr. buys the company from his dad, and he's like, who could I use as the star to kind of like get this thing to go, just to blow up? And then he calls Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, and because of that, because of Rocky 3, he had that now mainstream attention. And that's what Vince needed for what he wanted to do. He needed mainstream.
Yes.
And so the initial era, the golden era, when it started kicking off, building up towards WrestleMania, he goes into a partnership with MTV.
Yep.
And it starts getting that exposure to everyone. And he really produces a marketing machine. Merchandise, toys, ice cream, magazines, comic books. He really takes it to a bigger level than anyone had before.
Right, a huge level, and then he really got risky when he did WrestleMania 1, where he teamed up Hulk Hogan with another star from Rocky 3, Mr. T. Rocky 3 could be an episode of its own. The Rocky series could. And against Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful. And this was pay-per-view, which was a concept that
Closed
circuit actually, right? Which was a big risk, and I don't know if anyone in wrestling had done anything like this at that point.
Right, and Starrcade.
Okay.
The original Starrcade, which a lot of people forget Starrcade actually outdated WrestleMania. But WrestleMania was the show. Starrcade was, when you look at it top to finish, arguably a better wrestling program. But for what McMahon was wanting to do, entertainment.
Yes.
WrestleMania was the way to go.
Exactly.
And like you said, it was a gamble, but it paid off. And as you can see, through the golden era, it just became the yearly tradition. And we watched WrestleMania grow and grow and grow. And we watched the stars, get big. You had, Hogan, Piper, Andre, John Studd, Snuka, Junkyard Dog, like you mentioned, Don Morocco, Paul Orndorff, Ricky Steamboat, Macho Man, Demolition, The Hart Foundation, Killer Bees, Iron Sheik, Nikolai Volkov, King Kong Bundy, Ricky Steamboat, Ultimate Warrior. The golden era was full of Hall of Famers, legends, people that wrestling fans still talk about to this day.
Right, and you can't discuss the golden era without talking about one match. Well, there's several matches, but the first match that I think about, which I'm sure everyone thinks about, is Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant at the Silverdome. That was probably when Jesse Ventura said it was the biggest match in the history of professional wrestling, he wasn't that far. He probably was right. He probably was still right at this point.
Yeah, there was that Andre the large, physically in size and also in character. The same with Hogan, larger than life. And it was, as Gorilla Monsoon said, the immovable, irresistible force versus the immovable object, packing in over 90,000 to see what was going to happen at WrestleMania 3.
Right, and you have this, iconic match, and you have this this huge venue. And for me, this is like the one that one of the ones that I remember most, just watching the VHS over and over and over. Because this one was one that was actually on pay-per-view, so people could like record it at their home. I just remember watching like a VHS tape of it and just watching it over and over, just transfixed.
Yeah, to me, WrestleMania 3 was the peak of Hulkamania.
Yeah.
And we saw other stars rise during that time as well. Like, we saw Savage come up. And I remember WrestleMania 6, like, being ready for the Ultimate Warrior. He was that new, larger-than-life superhero character.
Right. I mean, and I've actually got that written down. Hogan versus Ultimate Warrior is another one of those just supremely important moments that took place during the Golden Era. And, I mean, so much of the Golden Era you can't leave Hulk Hogan out of. I mean, the Mega Powers part of that era. I mean, remember being in like, gosh, I'm feeling old right now, talking about going to school the next day after that Saturday night's main event, seeing that Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage had teamed up. I mean, that was just huge. I mean, and Savage, his coming out party was like on the undercard of WrestleMania 3, but people still talk about that match as one of the greatest matches of all time.
Yeah, when you talk about wrestling the way it is today, you have to acknowledge that if it wasn't for the Golden Era, it wouldn't be here today.
Right.
Had it stayed regional, you probably wouldn't have had still 23 territories existing.
Right.
They probably would have fallen off, promoters would have sold, their family may not have been interested in keeping it running. And so who knows where the state of wrestling would be.
I shudder to think about that because so much happened in that Golden Era. I mean, just again, looking at this, I mean, you can think about just WrestleMania, even like something like WrestleMania 4 with Savage winning the title for the first time. I mean, that moment. I mean, the explosion of the Mega Powers, '89. I mean, that's still one of the biggest pay-per-view buy rates ever.
Right? You know, you look at what all the Golden Era covered. It covered 1982 up till 1993. So you saw, you know, from the initial champion Iron Sheik, we saw Hogan, you know, become a 5-time champion in this time frame. We mentioned some of the other guys, you know, Andre Savage, Warrior, Slaughter, Undertaker really appears during this era. You know, Ric Flair, who was in the rival company at this time. So as you still had some territories were still existing as the Golden Era was kicking off, those were starting to die out. You know, and
Right.
as the NWA, that championship, which was really shown a lot in World Championship Wrestling, WCW, you know, Flair was their all-star. He was their equivalent to Hogan. You know, it can be said that Ric Flair is definitely a bigger wrestler than Hogan. A lot of people argue that Ric Flair, at that point, was the greatest on the mic.
Oh, by far.
But yet Hogan was the marketing machine.
Right, and Hogan had the machine behind him. I mean, Hogan had a Vince McMahon behind him, which, I mean, was a salesman. I mean, Ric Flair didn't have that, unfortunately. I mean, the Crockett's did well, but Vince McMahon's vision was beyond anything was beyond what the Crockett's had. But I mean, if you think about the NWA wrestling product during that time, I mean, think about the Clash of the Champions in '88, the Sting Flair match that ran on the same day as WrestleMania 4 on TBS. I mean, Flair made stars.
Right. Or a year after that, Flair and Steamboat, 1989, and what some people arguably consider still to this day the greatest wrestling match of all time.
Oh yeah, I mean, Flair and Steamboat, they had like 3 matches in '89, I believe, and all 3 of them were just amazing. I mean, I think Jim Ross said it was like the peak of professional wrestling as competition, because they went out every night just determined to have the best match on the card, and who was going to top it.
So had Ric Flair had the marketing machine behind him, had he jumped and came over at WrestleMania 5, as some people had predicted around that time, and looked like he may because of his contract situation, what could the golden era have been?
If Flair had come over during that time, one worry that I actually have is, would the WWF audience have appreciated him? Because a lot of the WWF audience could get kind of landlocked, if you will, and really not acknowledge what was going on in the NWA and get just really focus on that NWA product. I mean, I'm guilty of that myself. So I just worry that maybe the fans wouldn't have appreciated Flair as much as they should have.
So when you think back on the golden era, what does it mean to you? What are some of your favorite memories?
Well, like I said, the Hogan-Andre match, Hogan and the Warrior, WrestleMania 5, basically. I mean, I just remember that was like the first pay-per-view my mom ordered for me. And just sitting there watching it from start to finish, just like, I was just amazed by everything that happened that night. I mean, I think about it that night, I mean, that was Shawn Michaels' first WrestleMania. I mean, and again, we're going to be talking about him as we go on, but just so much happening on that card. And also, just thinking back to the golden era, again, the Savage Steamboat match, I just remember WrestleMania becoming that thing that you got all your friends together to watch. It became kind of like a Super Bowl type gathering during that time.
Yeah, for me, the memories of me that stick out during the golden era, definitely WrestleMania 3. I remember WrestleMania 2. I remember being young, watching WrestleMania 2, Hogan and Bundy, and having the big rubber WWE figures, and taking an ink pen and drawing the blood onto Bundy's head of the toy. And so, and of course the action figures, as they got smaller, more plastic, and got a little bit of movement going. Remembering those times, WrestleMania 6 definitely, SummerSlam 90. So a lot of that stuff stood out to me as well. And so that talent that he had, as we've mentioned, Hogan, Savage, Vince McMahon believed it was time to start moving to a different direction. He felt he had got all he could out of those established stars. And so we move into the next era, the new generation era, which runs 1993 to 1997.
And one of the things that I think about during the golden era is Vince is always kind of thinking ahead. And one of those moments, I guess I had it written down in the new generation era, but I guess it does fit more in the golden era, is when The Undertaker beat Hulk Hogan. Because we had never seen that type of character that debuted at Survivor Series 1990. That was a much darker character than anything the WWF had had. And then for him to actually beat Hulk Hogan, and I mean, granted it was a controversial victory, but it was just kind of one of those moments that I'll remember that, okay, the things are changing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Undertaker fits through every era. He's been in all these eras.
Yeah.
And he's evolved through these eras. So as you mentioned, at that time when he broke onto the scenes, it was dark and, it scared a lot of people. But nothing compared to how dark he would become 1998, 1999, which we'll get to shortly.
Right.
But so moving into the new generation, look, younger talent. It was the early 90s, so when you think of things that were going on in the 90s, the bright neon colors, he went with that and he started going with the cartoonish characters. And, but you had your main guys, the guys that could really carry the roster, the people that recognize, your Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Razor Ramon, Diesel, Lex Luger, the Smoking Guns, Jeff Jarrett. Those were your almost your reality-based characters that were helping to keep things going, as the other characters were really occupations and gimmicks.
Yeah, and during this era, you also kind of have in the background of this, or maybe even the foreground, depending on how you look at it, you've got the Vince McMahon steroid trial, which had an impact. I mean, and the business really dipped. You could see the business starting to dip towards the end of the golden era, as you said, some of your 80s superstars getting older. Vince knew that he had to get younger, and he was going to have to also put out smaller wrestlers because you couldn't sell the giants anymore because, so much of the controversy with that steroid trial, you had to go to like a smaller champion like a Bret Hart.
Yeah, and he was also looking for that faster pace, that athletic, to try to match what was going on in the world at that time. In America, the culture of what the 90s were becoming. But what was interesting is, as we mentioned, he became so large in the golden era, he really didn't have competition.
Right.
In this era, competition steps up. Ted Turner has WCW and makes probably his best hiring decision in promoting Eric Bischoff.
Right. And that was an under the radar move that ended up definitely impacting everything as we know it. What you had in WWF, one of the pictures we've got up here is of Yokozuna beating Hulk Hogan. That's a great image because that's another one of those moments where you just kind of just know that something is done. Because, like, when Hulk Hogan lost to Yokozuna, he's gone from WWF for, 2002?
Yeah. So at that point, he steps out in June of 1993, and we don't see him in WWE television until February of 2002.
Right. And during the same time, you also had the Macho Man getting pushed out of the ring and onto the microphone. Vince is really going with these younger guys. He had Ric Flair's contract had come up and he had gone back to WCW. So you really see him really going towards these younger guys, knowing that, the audience is going to have to get used to it. But again, in the long run, it's going to be what's best for his family business. For his lifeblood.
Yeah, and so I also wonder, was some of that decision to, Hogan was moving on to try to go do other things.
Right.
But yeah, to move Savage out of the ring, because Savage still wanted to wrestle. We've heard the stories where Savage tried to pitch of, hey, let me come off, let me have a rivalry with Shawn Michaels. He recognized a young Shawn Michaels as a great superstar to become, that he would develop into, and he wanted to have that rivalry. Could that have been part of it, of him not recognizing that competition was there? Because nobody in WCW had ever tried to do what Eric Bischoff was going to try to do. No one had ever had the, just the pure guts to step up and go head to head with the WWE.
And no one also had, and no one had the money. We're talking about Ted Turner. They would joke and call him Billionaire Ted, but he was a billionaire, right? And his name happened to be Ted, so he had money to throw at the product. And he also had a visionary Eric Bischoff that was really thinking to take it away from being like what they called wrestling and turn it into a mega marketing money-making machine.
Right, and not only that, but then a lot of people always say, Bischoff came in and he took what Vince McMahon had developed successfully in the 1980s and just repackaged it. But it was more than that. He went from announcer to executive producer to the president of WCW, and so he brought with him definitely a sense of media and the ability to go in and film it differently. The deal with Universal Studios helped out But what he did that people also don't recognize is we're used to pay-per-views every month now.
Mm-hmm.
That was Eric Bischoff. That wasn't Vince McMahon.
Right.
And so, he stepped that up. He put that format in there. Raw during this time, which kicks off Monday Night Raw that everybody's used to now, starts off 1 hour.
Yeah.
Not only 1 hour, but taped.
1 hour taped as squash matches.
Right. And, when you run into those situations where, you look at some of those early Raws and you can tell the announcers are filmed with the green screen behind them.
Right.
And they're actually doing their commentary over the matches in the studio. They're not actually there doing the broadcasting. But then when Eric Bischoff steps in and takes WCW, launches Nitro, and Nitro's live. He takes Nitro and he does it reality-based. He goes for an older crowd. He goes for deeper storylines and puts the pay-per-views out there. And Nitro is running 2 hours at this time. So everything he's doing is forcing the WWE to change their game.
Which, you need that. You need somebody to compete against. You need somebody to drive you. I mean, you need that in life. I mean, you hear great athletes think, like, I got to work hard because I know so-and-so is working hard. I mean, it really did cause Vince to have to elevate his game, and I'm glad that it did because the new generation era, it was a transitional time in the business. If you listen to like the Monday Night Wars DVD, you also hear about how close WWF came to actually going under.
And, everybody talks about how, Eric Bischoff did that with the older established talent that Vince McMahon had pulled back on, your Hogan, your Savage and everything. But, during this time, what's going on in the WWE in this era, as we had talked about the athleticism, Bret Hart becomes a 5-time champion.
Right.
He equals that number of what Hogan had done.
Right, but that's one of the things I've got written down here. I've got it written down WrestleMania 10, but I need to go back a little bit further than that because he won the title from Flair.
Right, he won the title. His first title was against Flair on a Coliseum home video.
Right.
Second title, WrestleMania 10. Third title, he takes it Survivor Series 1995.
Right.
Fourth title was the Fatal Four.
Final Four, yeah.
Or Final Four, excuse me. Final Four match in February 97. Then, of course, his fifth title, SummerSlam 97.
Right.
Which is kind of the end of the New Generation era.
Right. And when I think about WrestleMania 10, I also think about the match that he had with Owen, which was it was a different type of, again, it captures the type of match that WWF was going towards. They were going more towards like the scientific wrestling, more like what you would see kind of like a Steamboat Flair match in WCW during this time. They were going for a more scientific product, less cartoonish, more believable action.
Right, so the wrestling was, but yet they had the cartoonish characters.
Right.
So it kind of offset itself, and it didn't all click around the board. You had your Shawn Michaels there, you had your Bret Hart that can go in and had these classic matches, but they didn't have the characters, the creative, the story to really bring that out. Where, two of the established stars that we have behind us on the screen at this time, Diesel and Razor Ramon, jump ship. They go to WCW as Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, team up with Hogan, form the NWO, and so where WWE is going through a transition, WCW is going through a boom.
Yeah, it just, they couldn't have imagined what they were doing. When I saw that, just thinking even about the first Nitro, just the way that they brought in Luger. That was something that you just didn't do.
Right, that element of surprise that nobody had expected.
Right.
And at that time, nobody else had ever ran cable television in the wrestling world or had prime time other than WWE. So once again, that's WCW bringing the competition, changing things up. And, like getting back at Bret, so he becomes a 5-time champion during this time frame. Hogan was a 5-time champion as well. Do you feel the number of title reigns given to Bret is trying to create another Hogan to try to offset that, yes, Hogan was this big, dominant WWE star. Hey, here's a guy that matched that as well, and he's technically a better wrestler. He's a better athlete, even though he's not as over the top or as charismatic as a Hogan.
I never really thought about that, but I guess I do see that now because Hulk Hogan was just iconic, but he didn't have the wrestling. He didn't show the wrestling acumen that Bret Hart did. But Bret is going out here, and we got a shot of Bret wrestling Bam Bam Bigelow. We got a shot of Bret and Shawn before the Iron Man match. Bret Hart having good matches with Yokozuna. Bret Hart was kind of like a precursor to. It was kind of like he was kind of like a precursor to an AJ Styles, who was like going out there competing every week, as compared to when Brock Lesnar had the championship here recently. You would see Brock maybe once every couple months.
Yeah, and Vince McMahon had referred to Bret Hart that he was the Cal Ripken Jr. He was the Iron Man.
Yeah.
And because of that he would go. And so you had Bret trying to hold everything together. Mm-hmm. And then you had Shawn Michaels on the rise, and he comes in, wins the title WrestleMania 12, 1996. Shawn, arguably the greatest in-ring performer of all time. Mm-hmm. So two of the best wrestlers ever in here, but WCW is just creating ratings numbers that the wrestling world had never seen on the back of the NWO.
Right.
And so WWE's hurting. Everyone's turning the channel. Everyone's watching what WCW is doing.
You and me.
And so we start heading into what is WWE going to do to survive. And we've heard that multiple people were telling Vince McMahon that they had to change it. They had to go with a more reality-based, similar to what WCW was doing with going for that older crowd. But one man in particular had Vince McMahon's ear during this time, and that was Vince Russo, who pushed for a young male demographic, pushed for shades of gray, saying not everybody is a babyface, not everybody's a heel. Nobody in real life is good 100% of the time.
Fact.
Nobody in real life is bad 100% of the time.
Right.
And that some angles are more complex, and wanted to take things in a different way, try to do things that you wouldn't expect, go outside of the norm, bring in situations that not necessarily would be just in the ring, but carry larger than that and bring in the human emotion, the element, and a lot of shock value, which created the Attitude Era.
The favorite era of James R. Doerr, who says the Attitude Era was awesome, and yes, I do agree. The Attitude Era was awesome. It's what brought me back to WWE.
Yeah, exactly. So in our first episode, both of us had talked about that we had kind of turned away. And I stopped watching wrestling right around WrestleMania 7. This brought me back in by bringing in Mike Tyson. The Attitude Era brought me back in, and I got hooked. I went back and watched everything, got caught back up on everything I missed, not only in WWE, but WCW. In the Attitude Era, that was Vince McMahon's response to WWE's big success, taking it in a different direction, more realistic characters, edgier storylines, and you're talking about some of the most iconic characters of all time developed during this era. D-Generation X, Austin, The Rock, The Outlaw, Sable, Jericho, the three faces of Foley, Hardys, The Edge, Christian, the Dudley Boys.
Kurt Angle. No, did you say Kurt Angle? But yeah, you think about this era, we got to take it back to Vince Russo. I listened to his audio book, and he was just thinking about some of the things that he's like just observing his, I don't remember how old he said his son was during this time, but he was just kind of like paying attention to what's getting his son's attention, because what was getting his son's attention was going to get the WWF's audience's attention. And that demographic that you want, they want kind of obnoxious guys. It's like if you Triple H and Shawn Michaels, They wanted, they were anti-authority. You got Austin, and they wanted hot chicks. Sable, Sunny, Lena. I mean,
And what was also, when you think about like what made the golden era successful, was trying to capture that mainstream audience. And so, you know, you did that with your guy who had, you know, grabbed attention through Rocky 3 with Hogan. You know, you brought in Mr. T, you brought in Cyndi Lauper, you brought in Muhammad Ali, and you know, you just kept building on that celebrity. You had that partnership with MTV. You know, they try to keep doing the celebrity thing, even through the new generation.
right.
But there wasn't a larger celebrity at this point in time that was going to grab attention than Mike Tyson.
No, not even close.
He was the pay-per-view king, and so when they brought him in, it took all eyes, put it on the product, and then you were able to take the product and match, similar to what they were doing during the golden era, trying to match what was going on. We talked about in America, we talked about how, you know, the new generation era tried to match as well with the colors, the schemes, and everything of the 90s. The Attitude Era matched what was becoming the popular thing during this time frame. Jerry Springer, you know, Howard Stern, these things that were picking up. Vince Russo noticed that as well and put that in. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening or watching this and are going to make comments of, it wasn't Vince Russo, it was Vince McMahon, but we have to keep in mind that Attitude Era starts, the writing team is Vince Russo, Jim Cornette, Vince McMahon. From there it becomes just Vince Russo and Vince McMahon. From there it becomes Vince Russo, Ed Ferrara, Vince McMahon.
Right.
So Russo is the head of creative through this whole time. And, you know, people will say, well, Vince McMahon was the filter. Well, I mean, think about what a filter is, like a filter for water. All the water comes down, the filter just purifies it and brings it through.
Right.
The filter doesn't create the water.
Right.
It just purifies it. You put a filter in a car for oil. The oil comes through, the filter purifies it, keeps, you know, any corrode, any extra from coming through. So, if that's the case, if Vince McMahon's a filter, the ideals are still coming from Russo.
Right.
And so maybe, you know, I'm not saying 100% of everything came from him, you know, but like him and Ed Ferrara had talked about since then, that they would bring stuff to Vince and Vince would say, you know, he would cut it here or he would expand upon it further. But the original ideal, or that hole that became the diamond, was from them.
And also, I think about this episode of Livewire. I've seen this clip of just Vince Russo being upset about the product. I mean, that's a balls to say that. Because, I mean, when you got a personality like Vince McMahon, an alpha personality, you don't want to poke the bear like that. I mean, because you probably had people tell, oh, Vince McMahon, everything is great. I mean, everything is good with these cartoon characters, CL Hopper, and, you know, Duke the Dumpster and stuff like that. I mean, Vince Russo says, this sucks.
Yeah, and so, you know, when you look at what he, you know, and granted, I wasn't there, so I can't say who wrote what, who did everything, but you can't deny that if you watch the episodes of Raw before he started writing, and then when he took over, and then when he left, there's a difference.
There's a difference.
You feel the difference when he starts writing, and you feel the difference when he's gone.
Right.
So, that was him. How much was him? You know, you hear people argue that, you know, oh, it wasn't. You hear people argue that, yes, it was. But when he was there was definitely a difference, and it was probably, in my opinion, the most exciting time ever.
Right. And like, people like to dump on Russo. People like to, like, just take craps on him and stuff like that and say, well, he also did the Viagra and pole match. I mean, we're not saying everything the guy did was 100% right. He would tell you that. He would tell you, yeah, I did some stuff wrong.
Yeah,
but you gotta take some shots.
Yeah, and you also, a lot of people look at what was going on at the end of WCW, which would be another whole episode in itself, but I think that was a desperation time in WCW when he came back his second run at WCW. I think that was desperation of trying anything to spark a rating.
Right.
Where during the Attitude Era, things were developed so well. I remember, and like no one denies that he got every character involved in a storyline, which was great because that's why we developed so many stars during the Attitude Era. Is when you get everyone involved, you can figure out who's good, who the crowd likes. But when you're limiting your stars and limiting your storylines, how do you produce the next level of talent?
Right. And I mean, think about the talent that we got during this time. We didn't just get like wrestling talent at this point. I mean, Mick Foley's been a best-selling author. I mean, Stone Cold Steve Austin he's just a pop culture icon. I mean, The Rock, need I say more? I mean, highest grossing actor in Hollywood right now.
Yeah, and the stuff that D-Generation X did, whether you're talking about the original with, Sean Triple H China, or you're talking about the version after Sean was gone with, adding in X-Pac and the Outlaws.
Right.
That stuff just hooked you.
Oh yeah, no doubt. I mean, it hooked you, and it hooked that audience that had grown up maybe during the golden era. I mean, during this era, they might have been in college. I mean, that's where I was at during that time. I mean, you wanted to see them. I mean, because they were acting like you. They were acting like me. I mean, they were being goofy. They were being funny. I mean, so that's what you wanted to see. You didn't want to see the cartoon characters anymore.
Yeah, when you look at, some of the stuff that came out at that time, when Bruce was the head of creative, you can start with King of the Ring, 98, and feeling what was developing with Austin and what was going on Austin and The Undertaker with Kane and Mankind, all this merging together between the four of them, that leads into SummerSlam, that then carries into September and October, putting the title vacant, which leads into Survivor Series 98, the tournament, which is one of the best stories ever, ending with the big switch, the big swerve with The Rock becoming champion, which then leads into Royal Rumble 99, all the way up into WrestleMania 15. The stories were so well developed and they flowed. You really don't see that anymore, of a storyline developed that far out and that just flows all the way through.
You don't, and the ones that they actually take the time to do it with are the ones that are the best told stories. Like right now, the first one that pops in my mind is Daniel Bryan and The Miz.
Right.
I mean, because that thing's been so, that thing's kind of developed organically.
Yeah. And at this time, everyone was involved with the story. Every story, every match, every promo, everything was to push a story a little further. And so it made everything feel special. The storylines felt special, the characters felt special, that you really looked forward to the pay-per-views. The pay-per-views were like holidays, like once a month.
Oh yeah.
It was like a huge thing. I remember everybody would gather, not only to watch Monday Night Raw, but then when the pay-per-view rolled around, it was like everybody bringing food, kicking in money, and sitting around and watching this pay-per-view because it was can't miss. And go ahead.
Yeah, you wanted to be there. You just could not stand to miss a pay-per-view. That was just, that'd be worse. I mean, you'd rather skip Christmas than miss a pay-per-view.
Yeah, you couldn't go anywhere at that time and not see a wrestling t-shirt. Wrestling had became mainstream. It had done something where the ratings were coming from. The ratings were high. WWE is now winning the ratings war. They take over in April of 98, but WCW is still high. Both shows at that time, WCW, who's losing the ratings war, is getting higher ratings than there are today.
Yeah.
And so that that showed you that you had more than just wrestling fans watching. And one of the things that I thought was really big about that at the time was the way the crowd was involved. I think that's what kind of brought people in, made it exciting. What made it exciting for me, all the wrestlers had catchphrases and their promos. A crowd would talk along with them. The signs were a big deal. Bring a sign to the ring that they're going to pan around at the start and they're going to catch your sign.
Right.
And it made you feel like you were part of it.
Right. I mean, like when The Rock would cut a promo, that would be, like everything else is cool on the show. I mean, everything else is great, but I'm watching to hear The Rock cut a promo. And he would, he was so amazing at just grabbing the crowd and just, I mean, even when he was supposed to be a heel, the crowd is like trying to sing along with him. And he's saying, poo, poo. And he's like, this ain't singing along with the champ. I mean, he would do that. The Outlaws, your ass better call somebody. I mean, that's what they got you involved. And that's all we want.
Yeah, and part of that was also, you were, not only were you involved, but you felt attached to those characters because they were so well developed, and they were developed beyond just the ring, or beyond a promo in the ring, or beyond a promo backstage.
Mm-hmm.
You saw, cameras in the locker room. You saw cameras outside the arena. I mean, you don't really see that as much now. As during the Attitude Era, there wasn't a place that wasn't part of the story.
Right.
It was as if you were actually there. You were actually watching. Cameras didn't exist. Same as a movie. A movie's not set in front of one scene or two different backdrops the entire time. It moves around. The characters move to different places to make it feel real.
Right.
And that's what we were getting during the Attitude Era.
Right. And I think about things like the Three Faces of Foley interview, like where they take Mankind and they do this interview where they take you back to when he was a kid and he hitchhikes to the garden and watch Snuka versus Morocco, and they show him as the Dude Love character. I mean, think about something like that where they get you more emotionally invested in the character. And then you remember that Think I'm Not an Athlete commercial?
Right, the Attitude, come try us.
No, I'm thinking about the one where it was like, you think I'm not an athlete, where they're talking about how Farouk was a All-American at 4.
Yeah, that was the Attitude Era commercials.
Yeah.
That was Come Get Some.
Yeah, and then there was also the Super Bowl spot too.
Yeah.
I just think about those sorts of things that, in particular, this Think I'm Not an Athlete one, where they're talking about Shawn Michaels was talking about some of the things that he...
Like a dozen concussions.
Yeah, just stuff like that got you more, again, emotionally invested in the character, in the people that, it's like, yeah, these guys are putting themselves on the line.
Right, and it gave you as a justification as a wrestling fan for people that said, well, wrestling's not real, because they would end it with, they would talk about their injuries, they would talk about how they were legitimate athletes, in sports other than wrestling, and they would end those, the Attitude Come Get Some commercials with, try lacing my boots.
Right.
And so, that kind of gave you that little battle cry of, yes, get behind it, which was such a, the Attitude Era took it beyond wrestling, beyond the TV show. It became an event.
Yeah. So. Definitely became an event, and I've got Austin 316 written down here. That's when you see that Austin 316 shirt. I still see it. I think I saw one a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and when we still see what was going on the other side at the time, the NWO, you still see those shirts around, and you still see D-Generation X shirts out there. You still see rock shirts. So the Attitude Era definitely has, still to this day, has an impact and a fond memory. But one of the things that, in my opinion, is when the Attitude Era started to end, we really saw the end of the uptick in wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
During, we had talked about, you had mentioned how important competition is. We had talked about the competition on the other side. At the end of the Attitude Era, ECW's gone, which was never a direct competition. They didn't have a Monday night show. They really didn't get, a cable show until towards the end of the Monday Night Wars. It was on Friday night. But also during this time, WCW goes under. Vince McMahon buys it out, and this show's gone. It's off TV.
Yeah, which that was, you could see it coming, but having a chance to watch things on the network and some of the story, it's kind of sad because that was it was such a wonderful era in the business when you're wanting to you want to keep track of both because everybody's stepping their game up, but then when it ends, it really kind of, it ended on the go-home show for WrestleMania 17, which, I don't know what your peak of the Attitude Era is, but that probably is like the peak match, peak moment of the Attitude Era, because that Rock Austin feud, I mean, those were the two, those are two of the biggest stars ever in the business.
Yeah. To me, I think my high point of the Attitude Era is WrestleMania 15.
Yeah, I can see that.
Austin and Rock, because at that time, you had spent 98 really building Austin and the Austin McMahon rivalry, and that's what developed The Rock into that mainstream star as well. And then they go head to head, and at that point, I remember the weeks building up to WrestleMania 15, everyone was talking about it. I couldn't go anywhere without people talking about it, people wanting to see it, and I remember it was a rush. Like, we were going to watch it at my cousin's house, and having to get there like 2 hours before it started to make sure you had a parking spot and that you had a spot where you can sit down to be able to see the TV. Because I sat down and I tried to count it up the other day thinking about it, and we squeezed like 18 people into a living room to watch this thing.
Oh yeah, we were watching it in my parents' basement. We had about 18 people too. Pizza, wings, all kinds of stuff going on. And I mean, that's what you did back then. I mean, it was about that coming together, and you're watching the first of their 3 matches, which, I mean, I just can't put it into words.
And it was so mainstream that you had, backyard wrestling companies popping up. You started to see more independent companies developing, or traveling around. Like, I remember so many independent, like, small wrestling promotions coming through Kansas City at that time that you typically wouldn't see, prior to that. And what was also interesting is the Attitude Era took the fans to a different level, to where they became so interested in the product, so interested in what was going on with wrestling, that they started becoming interested in behind the scenes. And so, the dirt sheets and the internet really start kicking off, which that in itself starts kind of changing things going forward.
Right.
It starts, kind of elevating the knowledge of the product and the business and the fans.
Right, and that's really takes us into I think that takes us into the Ruthless Aggression Era perfectly, because the fans had become so smartened up, and you didn't have the competition anymore, so all they're really paying attention to is you. So it's like, okay, so what's going on with this person? What's going on with that person?
Yeah, so the Attitude Era ran 1997, late 1997, up to 2002. And that leads us into Ruthless Aggression, where they go from World Wrestling Federation, WWF, to WWE. They run the whole campaign, get the F out. You have the brand split, trying to create competition within themselves. So taking Raw and SmackDown and making them basically 2 separate brands. Some of these guys were around during the Attitude Era, but the new big stars of the Ruthless Aggression Era, Triple H, Angle, Mysterio, Edge, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Randy Orton. Bradshaw becomes JBL, RVD comes in, Lesnar, Scott Steiner, Goldberg, Austin and The Rock leave, Shawn Michaels returns, and, you're really up and running with one company, but trying to form as 2.
Yeah, and it's these transitional times are always interesting to me, because it's really kind of interesting to see what people are going to come up with. And shout out to Rising Phoenix, because this was their favorite era of the eras. Like, the moment that I remember most from this era, there's a couple. Really, I think about WrestleMania 18 with Hogan and The Rock. I mean, just a match that you literally never thought you would see.
Right, it was that dream match. Jerry King Lawler had that great comment of, we'll never be able to see Muhammad Ali versus Mike Tyson.
Right.
But we get to see The Rock against Hulk Hogan.
Right. And then also in that same year, 2002, which 2002 was like really, I think they talked about how the business was really starting to have a downturn during that year. 2002, I think about SummerSlam from 2002, which is one of my favorite pay-per-views ever. I mean, for reasons, because you had the return of HBK against Triple H, You also had Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio as an opening match. Then you had Rock versus Brock, which I have written down here as one of my favorite moments from that era, even though Brock won.
Yeah, the Attitude Era is definitely my favorite era, but it's hard not to look at the Ruthless Aggression Era and look at the lineup of superstars at that time. You took some of the best of WCW, some of the best of ECW, some of the best of WWE, and put it all together. And I know I kind of myself tuned out a little at this time. I wasn't watching everything. I was kind of tuning in here and there, and would have to later on once again get caught up on everything because it didn't feel the same as the Attitude Era, and so I kind of fell out a little bit. You know, going back looking at it and seeing some of the things that really stood out during that time makes me want to go back and catch up on this again and give it another chance.
Yeah, it does. Like, I think about a lot of the stuff from like 2004. I want to say I was watching SummerSlam 2004 the other day from Toronto, the one in Toronto. It was Triple H and Eugene. Triple H made Eugene look good. I mean, it's crazy to think of Triple H wrestling Eugene on a pay-per-view, on an undercard of a pay-per-view, but that match was actually very entertaining.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot happened during this era. You know, they tried to, you know, we had talked about the brand split to try to create internal competition, almost try to give an alternate to people, you know, to bring people in, but it's kind of hard to give an alternate when it's, you know, done by one company. It's, even though they tried to run both separately, I think a lot of people didn't give it a chance because they still viewed it as one company.
Right, and it just, I think about like the shows during that time, and there was even still, they tried to do like brand specific pay-per-views to try to create, you know, this rivalry within itself, but it worked to a degree if you're like a hardcore fan, but you still need that competition from the outside, because when you had the NWO on TNT, you gotta come with the DX to compete with that. Now, you got NWO and WWE, and no competition on TNT, you can let off the pedal. There's a tendency to let off the pedal.
Right, and you have a lot of people that argue, well, why didn't you do more with this guy? Why didn't you do more with that guy? But, you know, like we said, the roster was so stacked at this time. I mean, you have, you know, Scott Steiner, Booker T, Goldberg, you know, the final champions of WCW are all in this one place. You have, you know, like you just mentioned, the NWO was there, you know, the biggest faction arguably in the history of wrestling. You have Shawn Michaels, one of the greatest of all time there. You have Triple H, who's arguably the biggest star in wrestling at this time. You have John Cena on the rise, you have Batista, you have Brock Lesnar. I mean, you couldn't have that many champions, so actually splitting up, you know, putting half the roster on Raw, half the roster on SmackDown, actually gave more camera time and more opportunities.
Right, it gave more camera time to people like John Cena, to people like, I'm pointing the edge here, I mean, to people like the late Eddie Guerrero. It gave them more camera time. I mean, it gave us Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle. I mean, when I think about the matches that those two had with each other, wow.
Yeah. And when you just mentioned Edge during that time, so during this time, Edge becomes the rated R superstar.
Right.
You know, arguably one of the best characters of Ruthless Aggression era. John Cena, also arguably the biggest character to come out of Ruthless Aggression, the biggest new character.
Right.
But yet both of those characters, what would they have done in the Attitude Era? The rated R superstar, where he stood out in Ruthless Aggression, would he have just blended in during the Attitude Era?
He probably would have just blended in, but as creative as Edge is, he would have found a way to stand out, which during the Attitude Era, he did kind of stand out as, I mean, he started out as part of the Groove, but...
And then ENC, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I definitely think he was talented enough, but just as a character in itself, it got a lot of attention in this era,
Mhm.
but it kind of would have blended in the Attitude Era. Is part of the reason that him and Cena got so much attention and people latched onto these characters was because it was missing the Attitude Era, and it was that, oh, these guys feel like what we just loved previously.
I think that's part of it, and I also just think that, I mean, they're just the type of character, they're just the type of guys that just have the type of charisma, just naturally, just being who they are, and that's what people will really, I mean, well, Cena got, I mean, a lot of people kind of started to dog Cena because, they felt like they were being forced down, but they were just being themselves, and that's what got people, that's what's always got people over, people being themselves with the volume turned up.
Yeah, and the rivalry they had with each other, because Cena became such the corporate babyface, even though, it's not really supposed to be his character. Like you said, people felt they were being fed him, so he felt like a product of the machine, which I like Cena, and I'm not taking anything away from him. But it made that counterplay against the rated R superstar. It made it such a good rivalry.
It did, and they had such chemistry in the ring together. You wanted to see them go at it.
Yeah, and so, as we see, WWE tried to recreate ECW during this time, but it wasn't ECW, it was the WWE version of it, so it failed miserably. And so as the Ruthless Aggression, which is definitely a transition period, it was kind of trying to carry parts of the Attitude Era, but at the same time pull away from that.
Yeah, it did. It tried to pull away from it, but it did also give us, it gave us a lot. Again, it gave us the continued evolution also of Chris Jericho. I've also got written down here, during this era, we also get a fella named CM Punk.
Yeah, CM Punk burst on the scenes. We got to see Ric Flair return to the WWE. We got to see something that nobody had ever expected. Eric Bischoff show up on WWE TV, just as a camera, which, just as a character on camera, and which I had always wondered, I get initially why you bring him in just as a character. I've always wondered why, in the years since, they haven't reached out to him to see if he'd want to be part of creative or anything backstage and see what he could do. I'd definitely be interested in that. But yeah, you had so much going on during this time. But one of the things that stood out to me as I was putting this together was, especially when you think of where we are now, and we'll get to that here shortly, the women's division, the Divas. During the Attitude Era, there was a lot of, the bras and panty matches, things like that. But when you move into this era, Ruthless Aggression, you had Trish Stratus and Lita, Mickie James, going out there, Victoria, going out there having matches against each other that are starting to take it to a different level than what you've ever seen in women's wrestling.
Yeah, and I was just happy to be staring at Trish while you were talking about that, because she was and still is a beautiful woman, but her and Lita actually main evented a Monday Night Raw. They were like, they would push it to the limit. Then you also have Molly Holly during that time. She was also amazing in the ring. I'm trying to think foolishly. A woman that doesn't get a lot of attention during this time, that was another female wrestler, was Jazz.
Right? Yeah, Jazz was there. And, so it was almost like they were the ones who pushed the door open for what's to come.
Right, and I can't wait for that all women's pay-per-view. I just can't shout out the WWE enough for this whole women's evolution, because they have taken the woman, they've made women's wrestling, they've made them more than just eye candy. They are legitimate athletes that are showing that they can do phenomenal things.
Yep, yeah, and I definitely got some more notes on that as we go forward, but, so we now move, Ruthless Aggression's over. We went from 2002, 2008, and now into 2008, going up to 2013, we have what's known as the PG era. And so this was starting to move. It was kind of going more of the conservative edge, kind of really becoming more family entertainment, you know, getting more friendly sponsors, getting it's okay to bring your kids to the event. You know, Shawn Michaels retires, Cena becomes one of the biggest stars of all time. You know, you also have newer guys, like, you know, really rising up, even though, you know, some of these guys debuted during Ruthless Aggression, they really start to rise during this period, and that's, you know, CM Punk, Alberto Del Rio, The Miz, Daniel Bryan, Dolph Ziggler, Ryback, The Shield.
Yep. And I pretty much have all of those moments written down. During this time also, you start to see Triple H transfer or transition more into the office role. So he's starting to influence the product down in FCW, which is where guys like The Shield came from and were developed. So during this era, one of the other moments I've got written down here is, oh yeah, you've got The Miz there, and you've got the picture of definitely the pipe bomb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you had during this time, you know, Shawn Michaels retires, and, you know, you have, you know, The Rock comes back during this time frame, but it's really definitely lost its feel, it's lost its edge. You know, it could be potentially because there isn't competition to keep the WWE on their toes. And so that's when it sets up the CM Punk hype bomb that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
When he sits down and he just cuts that promo on the state of wrestling. And, you know, kind of really opens up the door to taking this guy who was there and I don't want to say underutilized because he had been a multiple champion at that point, but it was almost like he was overshadowed.
Yeah, he was overshadowed because what think about it, during this time he had been a
Three-time champion at this point.
Yeah, 2 or 3 time champion. WrestleMania 27, he has arguably one of the best matches on the show. Was he wrestling? Was it Orton he went against it? Yeah, it was wrestling Orton on that one. But he's upset because the main event for WrestleMania 28 was already set with The Rock and Cena.
A year in advance.
A year in advance, which was something that had never been done. But his argument is that he's the best. And again, one of the best ways to get a character over is when they're being real. And everything he was saying, he felt in his heart.
And not only did he feel it in his heart, but I think why that stood out so much, captured so much attention, and really started to bring eyes back of people tuning in to figure and looking at this guy, looking at CM Punk, and suddenly catapulted him to the most talked about wrestler at the time, was because what he was saying rang true to a lot of people. You know, that, you know, he kept talking about that, you know, it's just the big machine, they're going to just keep force feeding you, and you're just going to cheer whatever they tell you to cheer. You know, you're not going to acknowledge, you know, the real great guys, you know, points out, you know, that no one can touch him, but yet no one sees that because, you know, you're going to get best, you're going to get fed the idea that John Cena is the best, you know, and so the stuff he was saying just rang true to so many people.
It did, and it also harkened back to the Attitude Era when you've got this anti-authority character bucking up against the machine.
Yeah, and at this time you had, you know, Vince McMahon came back out on screen to play a little bit of parts with CM Punk. Triple H really playing the authority part. So.
Yeah, I mean, what CM Punk did during this era, I wish he would come back. Please.
You know, and the great thing is, he could come back right now and deliver a similar promo, and it would work again.
It will work again because he's just being himself.
Right, and he can deliver that promo of what a lot of people feel is that they're being force-fed Roman Reigns.
Right.
You know, and I mean, he could come out and imagine a CM Punk against a AJ Styles, against a Seth Rollins. I mean, the guy could, Daniel Bryan, which, you know, they had a lot of matches back then, but again now against The Miz. CM Punk could come back right now and be bigger than he ever was and get to do one of the goals that he never got to do, is main event WrestleMania.
and he deserves the main event WrestleMania. I mean, he could come back and pretty much wrestle. He wouldn't even have to wrestle every night, but he's the type of guy who would wrestle every night. But he could come in and wrestle every 3 months and draw huge money.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another thing that's interesting during this time is, so initially during the Golden Era, you had the territories.
Mm-hmm.
And as the Golden Era went on, the territories existed for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Even after most of the territories were gone, you still had, your ECW, you still had your WCW,
Mm-hmm.
that people could go in and they could really develop their craft.
Right.
That stuff had been gone for a while at this point. And so Triple H has his brainchild of ways to really develop and kind of build the stars towards the future. Stars that we're going to see in this era, which is the development of NXT.
Right, and NXT has started off as Florida Championship Wrestling, and they got rebranded as NXT, and just we could do a show on NXT alone. I mean, when you look at the Shield, all 3 of these guys came out of that. I mean, and you take a guy like, for example, Seth Rollins, who we met in Phoenix at WrestleMania 26. I mean, he came through there. I mean, they take this guy who played football at Georgia Tech, who has wrestling in his blood, and I mean, he comes through there. I mean, like, the women's evolution really started to take shape in NXT.
Right, so you have this era really building into the next era, which starts in 2014, and runs up to now. Depending on what you look at, some call it the reality era, some call it the modern era. But you have the guys like you just mentioned, developed through NXT.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, they're coming up. You had Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, Dean Ambrose, Bray Wyatt, the return of Brock Lesnar. You have other guys that were around, Finn Balor, The New Day. You have some established stars that are still existing, but you have a lot of new stars that are coming up, Kevin Owens, etc., that they were able to, pull from different areas. You have AJ Styles, who came from TNA. You have Strowman. You have Bobby Roode, who came from TNA. Cesaro, Sami Zayn, Nakamura, and not to mention, the women's evolution going on. But yeah, so I mean, you're starting to get loaded with a lot of strong talent again.
You are, and you've got some moments during this time that, when you think about Sting coming in, I mean, Sting wrestling at WrestleMania is a moment that I'll never forget, that I've been looking forward to forever. I mean, when I'm just transfixed by this picture. I mean, Charlotte Flair, the return of the Hardys, which I was there for, which was just an amazing moment. I mean, the rise of Seth Rollins as an individual superstar, Daniel Bryan main eventing WrestleMania 30. I mean, the streak ending.
Mm-hmm.
Again, another one of those where were you moments.
Yeah, and so you also try, the brand split, trying to shape things up again during this era, the creation of the Universal title to kind of give you a split between the WWE title and Universal title. You have, shows on the network, 205 Live, NXT, that try to give a little bit of a different flavor in there. And one of the things that I really wonder, so when you look at the guys they brought up, they went out and they grabbed the top independent wrestlers that were out there to bring them together.
Right.
How similar is this to the Golden Era, when Vince McMahon went out and he grabbed the top stars of the independent companies, the regional companies, and brought them together? Are we seeing things come full circle and the restart of the WWE, just like it was during the Golden Era? He brought in an all-star crew then of regional talent. They have an all-star crew now of independent talent.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing new under the sun. I mean, any fad that you see today you've seen it happen in the past. So, I mean, some strategies just always seem to work. I mean, Kevin Owens was on the independent scene, Seth Rollins on the indies, Daniel Bryan on the indies. I mean, with few exceptions, the home runs that Vince has been hitting has been by, like you said, taking guys from the indies. one obvious exception to during this era is Ronda Rousey.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely pulling in some mainstream attention because of the popularity of UFC, and she was the biggest, most popular female talent in the history of UFC.
And again, I mean, he's done that before with signing Mike Tyson.
Right, and so, this era you have strong talent, you have strong matches.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people argue that, this strong style is dangerous. They call it a bit reckless, they're worried people are going to get hurt. I definitely understand that, but when you look at what the Attitude Era was compared to the Golden Era, the chair shots, everything like that, the same argument was made then. So, we'll see, maybe 10 years from now, we look back at this era of, it was pretty tame. We'll always see, because, the performers have to go in and they don't want to do what's been done before. They want to be innovative. They want to show things that have never been done. They want to steal the house, and that's that competitive nature that we love. The things that stand out to me in this era is why I miss the Attitude Era so much, I should say, is, there's less crowd interaction, less unpredictability.
Right.
And not all the stories feel as meaningful. Like we were talking about earlier, the Daniel Bryan and Miz rivalry right now has so much history with it, so much built into it. The Shield story right now has so much going into it. The Charlotte, and Becky Lynch match has so much going into it that those feel special, but we don't feel that a lot. I mean, I know over the past couple years, a lot of the rivalries have just been, okay. Where during the Attitude Era, everything felt special. So, I'm liking that we're starting to see a little bit more develop.
Yeah.
And I'd love to keep that going.
I would too. Like, one of the rivalries, one of the things that I think I mentioned this earlier is like, one of the biggest things I've got written down during this is the streak ending. I mean, that was one of those moments that was some of that unpredictability. And then you have a full year later, they Taker and Brock main eventing SummerSlam. And then you got them having their Hell in a Cell match. I mean, it took time to develop. It was more unpredictability than what we've had during this era. I mean, another moment I've got written down here is when Brock squashed Cena at SummerSlam.
Yeah, and one of the things that, as we mentioned earlier, the women's evolution that's going on right now, their matches are unbelievable. The athletic talent right now. So we saw, when Trish and Lita and everybody kind of really kicked that open and taken it to a different level. Now, these women have came in and taken it to an even bigger level than that. They're main eventing pay-per-views, they're main eventing Raws, they're main eventing SmackDowns. Alexa may be the best heel there is right now.
Well, I can't think of a better one. Her and The Miz.
Yeah, her facial expressions, her in-ring ability, her promos are great. Charlotte is amazing. Just the overall women's division right now, Bayley, Sasha, Ronda, Natalya, Becky Lynch, Alexa Carmella, Naomi, Nia, Sasha, Asuka, Ronda Rousey. It's just an unbelievable group right now. And like you said, the Women's Evolution pay-per-view is going to be amazing.
Right. And we've even left some out. We've got the Riot Squad coming up now. The Bellas have made their return now. So
Mandy and so on. And so, it's like you have so much talent in the women's division. And so when you think of this era, where would you rank this era that we're in right now?
This era, it feels a little bit like, I would dare say, it feels a little bit like the New Generation era, and I say that not because of the flashy characters or anything like that, but because it's a time when the business is having to evolve and is having to kind of figure out, okay, what do the people want? Because they don't want the same thing that they wanted during the Golden Era, where these days the audience's taste seem to change much quicker because they've got so many alternatives. I mean, and you're not just competing against wrestling, you're competing against YouTube, you're competing against movies, you're competing against all forms of entertainment.
Yeah, so it doesn't have that mainstream appeal that's going to pull you in.
Right.
They still haven't figured out how to quite capture that right now. It's definitely becoming that niche product again. But one of the things that kind of stands out to me in this era is, do the pay-per-views still feel as important as they did during the Attitude Era?
I don't know that they do.
Yeah, to me it feels like it's a handful of them.
Yeah.
Other than that, your everyday run-of-the-mill pay-per-views just feel like another show.
Yeah, because your big four pay-per-views are still extremely important. And this last pay-per-view, Hell in a Cell, was very well done.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to find a way to differentiate your pay-per-view, which, well, this last one was actually 4 hours, but Raw is 3 hours, which used to be the length of a normal pay-per-view. You've got to find a way to differentiate that. So I'm just thinking that you've got to find a way to really keep the audience bought in and just find a way to keep us hooked. Dave had to step out for a bit, but and as I'm thinking about this, Roman is really the John Cena of this era. I mean, the crowd hates him, or they act like they hate him. I mean, I think about the night after he beat Taker at WrestleMania, they wouldn't let the dude get a word in for like 20 minutes. So they really don't, they definitely ain't feeling Roman. Let's see, let's look at this. I know some of you guys are just listening here. We got the return of the Hardys. We got the Demon Finn Balor up here. We got Braun Strowman. We got Sheamus and Cesaro. We got the Usos, who've been doing some amazing stuff. We got Dean Ambrose. We got John Cena kind of symbolically in the corner here because he started to kind of get edged out of the picture, and he started to transition into Hollywood, which he kind of used to dog The Rock for going to Hollywood, but that's okay. And Dave is back with us.
And so sorry, I had to step out for a second. But when we were, just discussing before I stepped out, we were talking about, that they don't have any other form of wrestling that they're competing with. TNA exists, but they're not really competition.
Right.
A lot of people don't have the ability to watch TNA. A lot of people can't see Ring of Honor. So you really don't have a true direct competition. They don't have really that mainstream appeal, but would it be possible to get an alternate through their own channel that they can control? Could you take the WWE network? Could you allow, an Eric Bischoff to come in, pull stars from the independent scene, from Japan, from, Ring of Honor, guys that aren't being utilized by the WWE, give him an hour or two a week to have his own program. It's on the network. They don't have to worry about getting sponsorship for it. They own the network. They can see how many people view that show, and help create an alternative. And so for people that, like the original WCW, would that be a reason for them to subscribe to the network? They can now see the new product Bischoff puts out there. Hogan's back in the fold. He can bring Hogan in, obviously probably not to wrestle, but to be part of the show. And then people could subscribe to the network to watch that and have, the WCW library to watch. Your other casual fans that were there during the Attitude Era that have also stepped away, but they love the Attitude Era, could you potentially, do the same thing, give like an hour or two to Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara, and have them have their own thing on the network? And because they would have their own separate shows, they could have their own individual titles per those shows. They don't have to cross over into Raw and SmackDown. And you can kind of give, here's a flashback to Nitro. Here's a flashback to the Attitude Era feel. For those that miss those eras, tune in, here's your alternate. And you can advertise the current product during those shows because it's your network. You can advertise what you want. and maybe to bring more fans back into the fold?
It's possible, and I mean, in some cases it's desirable for the fans. I just wonder with some of the, for lack of a better word, smear tactics that have been going on against Russo, if he would be open to it. I mean, I know he's got a lot of things going right now. I haven't heard anything from Ben Ferrara, but I think I mean, they've got their own network, so they definitely have the platform for it. It's just a question of, would they do something like that?
Yeah, and I mean, granted, I don't know what the financial cost would be. It would be feasible to set something up like this, knowing that your really only revenue would be ticket sales to it, and then people tuning into the network. But I mean, you pull it off with NXT.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
And you pull it off with 205 Live. So I mean, it's possible. And then again, you could use, you could get sponsorship if you want for people to say, we're going to advertise on this. Anyone who has the network, we have over 1 million subscribers, etc. These are how many people that watch it. So you could create all this different feels within the network, and because it doesn't interact with your main storylines, you can give them full 100% creative control. And so instead of having a WWE CW version, where you have the WWE's version of ECW, you could truly let them up and run it and not have WWE creative say in it, because it's not on cable, it's not on syndicate television, it's only on the network. So it can be 100%, they can say, hey, TV14, TVMA, whatever they want to do, and it's through the network, so they don't have to worry about what a channel is going to say to them. They don't have to have anyone distribute the product for them.
Yeah, and I mean, you also have the option of parental controls. So if you've got kids that are going to be watching the network, you can just say they can't watch anything above this rating. So so you've got all the control over it.
Yeah, and so, I would love to see something like that. When we talk about, before I said, well, you were talking about how do you make your pay-per-view seem special and different from Raw. One of the things that, we constantly hear people say that the difference between the Attitude Era and now is attention span. Is that a legit argument when the matches in the Attitude Era were shorter than the matches now? If attention span's the argument, wouldn't that counteract it or contradict it that your matches now are longer? It feels like your attention span, you would want to go even shorter matches.
I don't know if I don't know that it's so much the match length as it is, we need more of the emotional investment. I really feel like that's what's lacking in a lot of this, because you give me, let's just say you just out of the blue just decide to throw, let's say, Roman Reigns versus Sheamus on the next pay-per-view. Why am I going to watch that?
Yeah, we were definitely talking about that earlier, that, the characters, when a character is developed well, when you really care about a character, when a story has time to develop, and you get that emotional connection, yeah, you're hooked. The same way, like with Austin McMahon's storyline.
Right.
That was developed so well. We're seeing it now with a few other rivalries coming in, and, which is great, because, when we first started talking about doing this show together, there really wasn't any at that time.
Right.
And now we're starting to see it. So I definitely like that they're starting to build stuff more. So maybe we are at the early cycle of this era, and that more is going to come out of it.
Right, because there's still so much we haven't seen. I mean, Bobby Roode, when is he going to be the world champion? I think that's something that has to happen. I mean, when is Kevin Owens going to get another championship run? I mean, we've got so much that can happen. I mean, so many rivalries that we can like build and develop. I mean, we still haven't had AJ Styles versus Seth Rollins.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a dream match, and I know we're kind of running long on this episode. We're about a little over an hour and a half in, so definitely longer than what we normally go. I feel like the Talk of the Eras has a lot more.
Yeah.
And that we can get more in depth on specific eras and specific dimensions of the different eras, and comparing and contrasting the different eras. So I still feel like there's a lot more to go. So should we table this now and come back even deeper into the eras next week?
I think we should, because there's still so much that we haven't touched on. I mean, we've touched on the WWE side a lot, but I mean, we can go even deeper into each era, because like there's so much stuff in the golden era that we didn't get a chance to talk about. I mean, just the golden era alone, and Lord knows we could spend like years talking about the Attitude Era.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and table this, and we'll reach out to everybody through our social media channels, and let's figure out what era we want to cover next, or how we want to cover it. Do we want to contrast, or do we want to go into a specific one alone? Or do we want to bring in more people we know that watch wrestling or used to watch wrestling, and have a panel discussion of what they feel between now and then? What did they like then that they stopped seeing that made them turn away?
I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities, so keep an eye out for us on social media. Hit us up with your opinions. Cheryl, tell us what you want to see, tell us what you like, tell us which eras you like, any matches, any superstars, anything that we might have missed talking about during this era discussion, because we're humans. This isn't our day job, I mean, so just help us out.
Yep, go ahead. And you know, we're building up to the Super Showdown as well, so yeah, there's still going to be more to come, more to talk about. And so who knows, maybe we'll see this continue. Like, we know a lot of the storylines are moving forward to Super Showdown, and also already starting to add towards Crown Jewels, so maybe we'll have a lot more to bring up of this era when we talk again.
Right.
So, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you. Please subscribe to us. If you're not, please head over to YouTube, subscribe us, follow us so you can see definitely the latest of what's going on. Please give us a like on Facebook, a follow on Twitter. We're also on Instagram, and coming soon, we will have our podcast out there. So please, look for all the different ways that you can support Kayfabe Critique. Give us, your opinions, what you would like to see and everything, and look for our posts on social media and help be involved with the show.
Yes, indeed. We look forward to all that, and look forward to our next episode.
All right, we'll see you next week.